Picture this. It's 1931 and you're standing in a field. Suddenly, your pants explode into flames without warning. This isn't some metaphorical meltdown, no liar liar pants on fire situation, and it wasn't a slow simmer or a sluggish smoldering either. These pants were igniting with the chaotic energy of 20 kindergartners hopped up on espresso let loose inside a Chuck E. Cheese without adult supervision and a malfunctioning animatronic band. It sounds absurd, but this is one of the most bizarre fire stories you'll ever hear, and it's 100% true. In the 1930s, New Zealand suffered an outbreak of combusting chinos and dangerously detonating dungarees as people's trousers began bursting into flames. But there's a perfectly rational, if not exactly reassuring, explanation for these cantankerous khakis. And no, it doesn't involve extra beans in the chili or a spiteful campfire spirit. The pyrotechnic pants of 1930s New Zealand were the result of weeds. And I don't mean the devil's lettuce, I mean literal weeds, the kind that invade pastures and choke out crops. But to understand how we got there, we need to rewind a bit. These weeds, particularly ragwort, were a relatively new issue in New Zealand at the time, and their unwelcome arrival was a side effect of a global conflict. Thanks to the logistical chaos of World War I, war horses were being shipped around the continent, hay was being imported from Europe, and nature did what nature does. And New Zealand's fields were suddenly full of this toxic invader, and farmers were desperate to eradicate it. And so began an unlikely chemical crusade, one that would, thanks to an aggressive herbicide, poor drying practices, and a lot of unsuspecting trouser fabric, culminate in what may be the most perplexing pants pyrolysis problem the world has ever seen. So yes, in a roundabout way, you can blame the spontaneous combustion of Kiwi keisters on the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and ecological imbalances, and of course, chemistry. And while your pants today hopefully won't require suppression systems embedded in the seams, the discovery of what caused these tempestuous thermal trousers has actually sparked some impressive innovations. But the learning curve on new combustion technology, let's just say it was steep. In some cases, fatally steep. These discoveries left behind a trail of good intentions, but also ashes. This is the story of New Zealand's exploding trousers on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark city landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer and former firefighter.
And I'm the co-host. I came for the crime, stayed for the existential dread, and now I live here. Please send snacks.
In case you don't follow us on social media, we do have an update in the Michelle Taylor case before we get started today. This was the Florida mother that took a plea deal after she was accused of setting a fire in her home to collect insurance money, a fire that tragically took the life of her son. The Florida State-run crime lab indicated that the fire debris samples that they collected showed the fire was arson because they found traces of gasoline in 12 samples. However, it turns out they were just misreading the results. 0 samples from inside the home actually had gasoline in them, meaning that there was 0 proof that this fire was arson. But because of some poor decisions in Michelle's past, prosecutors were still comfortable cashing in their ethics for another tick mark in the conviction tallies. And they decided they would still go to trial and drag her through the mud to see if they could get a conviction based only on circumstantial evidence, and that's what they set out to do. They also didn't want the public to know that the Florida State Crime Lab was so freaking sloppy and unreliable that it had lost its accreditation. Now Michelle, knowing she was facing a trial in which no one was pursuing actual truth and justice, did what many people in her position do. She pled guilty to a crime she didn't commit to hopefully avoid a life sentence. We call this a dark plea, and it happens every day in a justice system that runs on plea deals and not on truth. So Michelle's sentencing was May 30th, this past Friday, and the best outcome we could have hoped for was that the judge sentenced her to the least amount of time permitted by law based on her plea deal, and I'm happy to report that is what he did. He gave her 3 years with credit for time served, which means that because of the time she's already spent in prison awaiting trial, she will only have to serve a couple of more months, and then she'll be free to go home to her family. Now, this was the closest approximation of justice that could have been granted given the plea deal, so it is good news, But it doesn't feel like justice because everything that happened to Michelle during this case screams injustice. If you'd like to hear all of the problems in Michelle's case, go back and listen to the episode entitled Framed by Forensics, the Michelle Taylor case, and also listen to the episode Behind the Byline where we interview Liliana Segura, the investigative reporter that broke Taylor's case, because she gets into exactly how prolific the issues are at the state crime lab, and if you live in Florida, it should horrify you. What's happening in Florida isn't justice, it's unethical compromise and it's disgusting. And all of you lawyers that are more interested in convictions than in truth can go f*** off into the sun.
And you can also lick my sack.
So I just wanted to give you that quick update before we roll onward. Last week we wrapped up the 3-part series The Girls Are Gone, and it was a mentally heavy lift. It's a heartbreaking case, and I wanted a week where we could step away from such a heavy topic. Plus, it's our podiversary.
Did you say
podiversary?
I gotta put more emphasis on the D.
It's our podiversary.
Darn right it is.
1 year ago this week, on June 3rd, 2024, we relaunched Crime to Burn, and we are so grateful that you've been here along with us for the ride. Whether you've been with us since day one, or you just recently wandered into the fire, thank you for joining us on this wild, smoky journey. We started last June with a literal bang, covering the Benson car bombing, so it only seems fitting that we wrap up our first year with another explosion. This time in New Zealand's pants.
Every time I go to New Zealand, that happens.
And there's only one thing on our podiversary wish list. Your help unleashing this podcast upon the public like a fire alarm pulled by a raccoon at a Taco Bell. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell your weird coworkers. We're on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok. When you see our content, give it a like. Smash the share button like it owes you money. Leave a comment, any comment, even "why are you like this" is algorithmically helpful. And look, those 5-star ratings and reviews, they are our lifeblood, our oxygen, our metaphorical caffeine. If you haven't left one yet, now's your chance to be our hero. Want to get something for yourself for our podiversary? Of course you do. Head on over to our spread shop where you'll find mugs, shirts, aprons, hats, everything you never knew you needed until you imagined it with our logo on it. Be the person who wears a Crime to Burn apron while setting off your smoke alarm with flambéed mac and cheese. That would be iconic. Tag us in your merch pics. We want to see them. We need to see them, and we will validate your fashion choices like it's our full-time job. And if you've got fire stories, case suggestions, or a burning desire to tell us about your haunted easy bake oven, email us at crimetoburn@gmail.com. There's also another way that you can support the show if you are in the market for a dog containment system. As you're all likely well aware, we do have a dog, Winston, and we desperately love Winston, but Winston is high energy and low impulse control.
And he's just one backyard away from a misdemeanor.
And we were desperate to find a containment system to keep him in our yard but allow him to run free to work off some of that hound dog energy. So after several failed attempts to use GPS and satellite collars from other brands, we purchased the Polius wireless dog fence. No wires, no digging, no drama. It gives him the freedom to run.
Without turning the neighbor's garden into a crime scene.
Just sweet, invisible boundaries. Because Winston doesn't need a rap sheet.
Just a radius.
We've been so happy with the Polius system that we contacted them and asked if we could be an affiliate, and they agreed. So if you're looking for a concern-free canine containment contraption to save your sanity, visit www.polius.com, that's P-A-W-I-O-U-S, and if you use the code CRIME2BURN at checkout, you will get 10% off your purchase. Or you can find the affiliate link in our show notes. For each purchase made using the code CRIME2BURN, we will receive a small commission. But seriously, it's the first system we found that truly works to keep Winston happily hanging at home.
Instead of being the neighborhood's hooligan hound.
So zoom me right on over to www.polius.com and remember to use the code CRIME2BURN at checkout. Let's set year 2 on fire. Metaphorically, probably. Because it's our podiversary. A flaming good cheer. We've been in your ears for a whole blazing year, from car bombs to scandals, from fire to flame. We've set the world burning in true crime's name. Now back to the case we've got for today, and the case of New Zealand's pants flambe.
Did Dr. Seuss write this?
I am not a good poet. It was really late, and I was like, I'm just going to put a poem here.
How did you summon the ghost of Dr. Seuss?
I don't know.
Were there candles?
No.
I'm going to find a salt circle out in the front yard, aren't I?
It's just me, a Mountain Dew, and a really quiet house after midnight. Let's take a match to the mystery and figure out how a noxious weed, a war, and a little chemistry led to flaming fashion statements. On August 12, 1931, a local newspaper on the North Island of New Zealand reported the following, quote, "While Mr. Richard Buckley's trousers were drying before the fire recently, they exploded with a loud report. Although partially stunned by the force of the explosion, he had sufficient presence of mind to seize the garments and hurl them from the house, where they smoldered on the lawn with a series of minor detonations." Unquote.
Has anything ever exploded without a loud report? Are there silent explosions that I'm unaware of?
Not that I'm aware of.
All right.
Trousers were turning traitorous, dungarees were detonating. The laundry line was starting to look more like a fuse line.
What?
I'm gonna explain why, hang on. What in the scorching stitchery was going on? Pants hanging on laundry lines would spontaneously ignite. One man's drawers detonated mid-horseback ride. And while the image is undeniably hilarious, the consequences were no laughing matter. Some incidents resulted in serious injuries and even deaths. What in the Kiwi conflagration conspiracy was going on? As absurd as it all sounds, the mystery can be explained by chemistry. But to truly understand how a nation's trousers became ticking time bombs, we have to rewind to a simpler time. A time when pants were thermodynamically stable, but the political landscape was reaching a boiling point. 1914. In the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
I remember back in my day, pants were thermodynamically stable.
You see, the path from European royalty to explosive trousers may seem like a stretch, but history is weird like that. World War I set off a cascade of global movements, of troops, of supplies, and crucially, of agricultural goods. Horses were shipped across continents, and hay was imported in massive quantities. And stowaways hitched rides in those bundles of feed. Among the freeloaders was a deceptively cheerful-looking, yellow-flowered plant called ragwort hitching rides across oceans, where some of it landed on the North Island of New Zealand. By the 1930s, this invasive weed had sunk its roots deep into New Zealand pastures, choking out native plants and proving toxic to livestock, particularly to horses and cows. Farmers were desperate for a solution. Enter sodium chlorate, a powerful herbicide, and as it turns out, an even more powerful trouser torture under the right conditions. Conditions that just so happen to exist in farmers' pants. Sodium chlorate worked wonders on ragwort. It was cheap, effective, and easy to apply. And because ragwort is toxic to cattle, Kiwi farmers had two choices. Introduce sheep, which could graze the weed down naturally, or go full chemical warfare. But sheep require extra labor, housing, and feed, and were not ideal for every farm. So most farmers reached for chemistry over biology in the war against the wart. And sodium chlorate took off like flat screens on Black Friday sales. In 1930, New Zealand imported almost no sodium chlorate, but by 1937, over 1,000 tons were coming in annually. But there was one flaming problem. Sodium chlorate is an oxidizer. That means it readily produces oxygen. It's a reactant that strips electrons from other reactants during a redox reaction. If you remember your fire tetrahedron, oxygen is one of the essential sides. An oxidizer like sodium chlorate can keep that side of the tetrahedron intact even without outside air. And if you've listened to me harp on about ventilation rates and fire intensity, you already know why this is a big deal. A chemical that can create its own oxygen inside your pants? Yeah, that has big problem potential. In plain terms, sodium chlorate doesn't just make flammable things more flammable, it turns them into ticking time bombs. Impregnate your underoos with this stuff, and they become thunderoos. Ferocious fanny fodder, if you will.
That's your final form.
Here's how it happened. Farmers used liquid sodium chlorate and sprayer equipment to coat the ragwort, but no one warned them how dangerous it could be, and these sprayers were leaky and rudimentary. So by the end of the day, a decent amount of the chemical had made its way into the very fabric of the farmer's drawers. Drawers made of natural fibers like cottons and wools. And sodium chlorate is stubborn, it doesn't wash out well. Once the water evaporates, teeny crystals remain embedded in the clothing. Crystals that even the most aggressive Maytag spin cycle couldn't fully shake loose.
That was a good analogy. I appreciate that. Not quite as fast as like a direct drive whirlpool, but very solid.
All it took was a spark, a pipe ember, a stove's heat, even pants that were hanging on the clotheslines in the sun, or the friction between a saddle and a rider's rear end.
And this episode was brought to you by Saddle Lube.
And those pants would turn into the Hindenburg reenacted on someone's hindquarters.
Really? Friction and lube? No.
Friction and impact can cause sodium chlorate crystals to explode. Yeah, they bought it in liquid form and didn't realize that when the water was evaporating, it was leaving behind these little detonatable crystals in their clothes.
Wow.
And once a few pairs of pants went off like firecrackers at a New Year's party, an alarm was sounded. But by then the damage had been done, and New Zealand found itself in the midst of an unintentional fashion firestorm. At first, these exploding pants were dismissed as freak accidents. Maybe a rogue ember from the fireplace caught a drying hem. Maybe someone smoked their pipe a little too close to their trousers. But the reports kept coming, and it wasn't just reports of the pants catching fire, they were detonating on laundry lines, hanging by the hearth, and yes, cradling the bums of farmers as they bounced around their saddles on horseback. The rural press ran wild with the stories, some hilarious, others horrifying. And while many accounts were met with chuckles, some weren't funny at all. Farmers suffered serious burns. There were reports of scorched skin, charred clothing, and even some deaths linked to the sodium chlorate-infused garments. What began as a minor agricultural curiosity rapidly escalated into a combustible crisis. Eventually, the cause was identified. Sodium chlorate, when combined with natural fibers like wool or cotton, became a literal walking firebomb. And since no one had warned these men about the dangers of the chemicals soaking into their clothing, there wasn't much they could have done differently, aside from farming in the nude, which presents its own logistical challenges.
Although it does sound hot.
The issue wasn't just that sodium chlorate is a strong oxidizer. There's a little more chemistry to it than that. When sodium chlorate breaks down from the exposure to heat or even to friction, it undergoes a reaction that produces table salt, sodium chloride, and oxygen gas. That reaction is also exothermic, meaning it generates heat in the process. So now, in addition to liberating its own oxygen, it's also supplying a good portion of the energy needed to sustain combustion. A teeny spark could become a fully involved fiasco in your trousers. Think of the chemical on the tip of a match head. That's potassium chlorate, a close cousin to sodium chlorate. Both are oxidizers and both undergo exothermic reactions. So imagine soaking your pants in match heads. That's basically what happened. Tiny crystals of reactive material embedded in natural fibers meant these clothes were no longer just clothes, they were tinder waiting for a trigger. By the time the science caught up with the scorched pants, the damage was well underway, and the legend of New Zealand's exploding trousers was seared into Kiwi history. But potassium chlorate, sodium chlorate's chaotic cousin, has a nefarious little history of its own, long before it found its home on the tip of your matches. It was discovered by Claude Louis Berthollet, who noticed it gave off even more oxygen than potassium nitrate when it was heated. And when mixed with carbon, it detonated. Naturally, he thought, this is exactly what I need to make my boomstick more boomy. Berthollet decided to improve on traditional gunpowder by swapping out the potassium nitrate for potassium chlorate. So he reached out to the director of the, and I am not making this up, French Gunpowder Commission, and pitched the 1700s equivalent of Hold My Beer.
Oh, if you think that's crazy, you should see the French Lube Commission.
The team, apparently subscribing to the more is more philosophy of explosive science, mixed 16 pounds of charcoal, sulfur, and potassium chlorate into a giant mortar and pestle. And before you cringe, don't worry, they took precautions. A thick board was placed in front of the contraption to act as a safety wall so they could be protected by some sticks while it mixed. Once they'd achieved a nice homogeneous powder, the team took a break for lunch. And when they returned, the entire setup exploded. The blast killed 2 people and likely convinced the others that Berthollet's boomstick had in fact boomed enough. So potassium chlorate was promptly demoted. No longer destined for artillery glory, it instead found a far less dramatic calling, lighting birthday candles and campfires from the humble tip of a matchstick. And before you start thinking the Kiwis were the only ones betrayed by their britches, and that you're safe because you're more of an indoorsy type, hold on to your loungewear. Because the world of combusting couture had a second chapter, and this time it wasn't sodium chlorate's fault. No, this fiery fashion faux pas tried to take out the fine ladies and gents of Europe and Australia who simply wanted a crisply starched collar. The culprit? Nitrocellulose, also known as cellulose nitrate. It made for a beautifully rigid collar, but it was about as stable as a toddler hopped up on chocolate and vengeance.
It's like super starch.
One wrong move, one stray ember, and that dapper dinner party look could turn into a full-blown fireworks fiasco around your neck. And this wasn't just theoretical. There are many reports in old newspapers about people suffering injuries caused by the nefarious neckwear. In 1912, a boy in Victoria, Australia, suffered severe burns when his celluloid collar ignited during a play. Despite efforts to extinguish the flames, the collar burned intensely before it could be removed, leaving the boy with significant injuries to his neck, face, and hands. So while the Kiwi farmers contended with combustible trousers, urban fashionistas faced their own flammable fashion fiascos. It seems that in the early 20th century, dressing to impress came with the literal risk of going up in flames. And yet somehow the risk of a literal ball of fire engulfing your head wasn't enough on its own to snuff out the trend of nitrocellulose collars. Nope, fashion's commitment to crisp neckwear was apparently fireproof. What finally doused the flame wasn't just safety concerns, but a combination of inconvenient truths. For one, these so-called washable collars had a really nasty habit of absorbing sweat and odors, and over time they would yellow and warp like a forgotten banana in the sun.
Banana collar?
Not exactly dashing. Then fashion itself turned on them. By the 1920s and 30s, men's dress shirts began shifting away from detachable, board-stiff neckwear and began embracing softer, attached collars that didn't double as explosive devices. And finally, science came to the rescue. New materials emerged that were less flammable, more flexible, and blessedly less likely to turn you into a 4th of July cautionary tale. So while celluloid found a second life in things like film reels and ping pong balls, its career in couture fizzled out mercifully before more people got flambéed in the name of fashion. But the pants. Oh no, the pants kept burning.
The pants are still burning.
Because unlike fashion trends, invasive weeds don't go out of style. New Zealand's farmers were so determined to eradicate ragwort threatening their livestock that they kept using sodium chlorate even after the reports of spontaneous trouser combustion rolled in. It took government intervention to protect farmers from their own asses and finally get sodium chlorate off the shelves. In 1946, New Zealand officially banned its use as a weed killer due to safety concerns, not just for fashion but for farm safety and the fire risk at large. And here's the kicker. Sodium chlorate is still used in some weed killers around the world today. In most modern formulations, it's blended with stabilizers or inerting agents designed to reduce the flammability and prevent the kinds of dramatic wardrobe malfunctions that plagued 1930s New Zealand. But the chemical itself hasn't changed. It's still a strong oxidizer, which means if it's not handled properly or if it's used in concentrated form without additives, it could absolutely toast your tushy. So while it's not likely that your modern gardening habits will set your shorts ablaze, let this be a reminder to read the label and maybe consider synthetic fabrics. But April, this is supposed to be a true crime podcast. This is all unfortunate, sure, but is any of it criminal? Nope, not yet. But don't put your handcuffs away, because our chaotic chemical friend does in fact have a criminal record. You see, sodium chlorate's strong oxidizing properties open the door to all kinds of nefarious possibilities, and unfortunately, it, along with its close cousin potassium chlorate, has been misused in some very serious crimes. We're not just talking about backyard science experiments gone wrong, we're talking about big crimes, explosives, arson, and even terrorism. That's why many countries, especially in Europe, have banned sodium chlorate altogether, not to save your trousers, but to keep it out of the hands of people with more dangerous intentions than weed control. It's an unfortunate fact that Unabomber Ted Kaczynski was a fan of sodium chlorate. When police raided his tiny Montana cabin in 1996, they found not only the chemical itself, but binders filled with notes painstakingly recorded experimental results from his efforts to perfect homemade explosives. Sodium chlorate wasn't just sitting on a shelf, it was part of his blueprint for destruction. And he wasn't the only one. Sodium and potassium chlorate have shown up in several terrorist plots and bombings around the world. In 2008, a failed car bombing in Exeter, England involved a homemade device built with potassium chlorate. In 2010, authorities in Greece intercepted letter bombs that included the same chemical. and according to government reports, there have been several bombings in which sodium chlorate was used. And that's all a bit grim, and it's our birthday. So while yes, sodium chlorate has a rap sheet, and yes, horrific crimes have been committed with it, we're going to lighten things up a little. Today's story isn't about domestic terrorism. It's about another crime with a horrific outcome, but a very ridiculous origin. A crime in which sodium chlorate wasn't even the main character, until the main character got all hot and bothered and went up in smoke, accidentally handing sodium chlorate the spotlight. Full main character energy. Giving up its respectable career lighting trousers on fire and guest starring in bomb plots, it took center stage in what began as nothing more than a sneaky little theft from a very big liquor cabinet. You know the type. It was the adult equivalent of sneaking a nip from Dad's whiskey bottle when he is not looking. And it happened in Vancouver, Canada on March 6, 1945. The steamship Greenhill Park was docked and being loaded with cargo bound for Australia. The standard stuff. Sunglasses, newsprint, tin plate, and 1,985 drums of sodium chlorate. You know, casual. Now technically, the crime wasn't the sodium chlorate. The crime was what the longshoremen were allegedly doing below deck, tapping barrels of overproof whiskey to steal a few nips. It's believed they tapped them like maple trees and used hot water bottles and soldered lunch pails to smuggle the booze out. Because if you're risking your life for petty theft, you can't have a leaky lunchbox giving you away. Then someone, probably, flicked a lit match or cigarette butt, just enough to ignite that precious pilfered whiskey that was now allegedly leaking into the hold where the longshoremen had tapped those whiskey barrels. A small fire broke out near hold number 3, and that's when everything started to unravel. The hold also contained distress flares, wooden crates of cellulose, and of course, the whiskey, which was leaking. It was flammable, and now it was on fire. The crew ran for their lives, and the fire intensified, and then came the first explosion. And that's when the sodium chlorate said, "Hold my beer," or "my whiskey barrel?" 3 more explosions followed, rocking downtown Vancouver. Glass shattered across the city. Pickles literally rained from the sky. Sunglasses landed in Stanley Park. It was raining condiments and accessories in a hellstorm of sodium chlorate-fueled chaos. The final death toll was 8, and dozens were injured. And while an inquiry blamed, quote, improper stowage of combustible materials and the ignition thereof by a match, unquote, the real culprit, according to a judge, was the combination of flammable cargo, flammable theft, and 100,000 pounds of oxidizer just waiting for its time to shine. So sure, maybe it wasn't a premeditated arson. Maybe it wasn't an act of terrorism, but the result? A fiery, explosive mess that turned petty dockside theft into a citywide catastrophe. All thanks to a chemical that just can't help stealing the spotlight. And after everything I've told you about the chaotic whims of sodium chlorate, you might think you'd never want to be within 50 feet of the stuff.
No, I want to marry it.
You might hope to never lay eyes on a canister of it, ever, until you're 30,000 feet in the air, and that highly volatile, chaos-prone chemical canister, it saves your freaking life. Because it's time for the sodium chlorate redemption arc. That same chemical, once hailed as a hero for fighting off toxic weeds threatening Kiwi cows, and later infamous for literally lighting people's pants on fire, has had a change of heart. It's working on its image. It's in its second act. Ladies, this is it. The bad boy with a heart of gold you've been waiting for, the reformed villain who's still a little dangerous, but only in ways that make you feel alive.
He's on the 13th step of the 12-step program.
And every time you get on a plane, he's right there, above your head, waiting for you to notice him, waiting for the moment you need him most. You see, sodium chlorate second act? It's flying high, literally. It's the active ingredient in many emergency oxygen generators used on commercial aircraft. When those little yellow masks drop from the overhead compartment during a sudden loss of cabin pressure, they're not connected to tanks of stored oxygen. That would be too bulky and too heavy. Instead, the plane relies on chemical oxygen generation, and sodium chlorate is the star of that show. Here's how it works. Inside that metal canister above your head is a compact chemical system. At its core is sodium chlorate mixed with a bit of iron powder and barium peroxide or some sort of similar additive. When triggered, either by pulling the mask or by cabin sensors, An ignition mechanism lights a small starter fuse. That's why they tell you to tug on the cord before you put it on your face. It's igniting that fuse. That kicks off a decomposition reaction, and 2 molecules of sodium chlorate break down into 2 molecules of table salt and 3 molecules of oxygen gas. This reaction produces oxygen gas, a lot of it, enough to keep you breathing comfortably for about 12 to 22 minutes to allow the pilot to descend to a safe altitude. And even better, the byproduct is just table salt. Well, table salt and a lot of heat, which is why the canisters can get up to 500 degrees Celsius or 930 degrees Fahrenheit while in use. That's why they're insulated and tightly contained, because sodium chlorate might have calmed down, but it's still got a fiery soul. So yes, the same compound that once turned pants into kindling and helped rain pickles from the sky now quietly sits above your seat, ready to pump out life-saving oxygen in an emergency. Just don't light a match near it. Some bad boys don't change that much. And remember, it is pumping pure oxygen into your face holes. But whether it's destroying your pants, giving you a breath of fresh air at 30,000 feet, or bleaching your printer paper, which by the way is its actual day job in most industries, sodium chlorate has one of the most chaotic chemical resumes you'll ever encounter. And that's this week's fanny-frying episode of Crime to Burn. Happy podiversary to us. Thanks for riding shotgun through the firestorm.
I was considering wearing a helmet.
For depression?
There's a helmet for depression?
I don't know. I said I picked a case that wasn't going to make you depressed, and you said you considered wearing a helmet. And I was just trying to follow the conversation.
You did really good.
I feel like maybe not.
You followed that all the way to insanity. I'm really happy with this plant. Like, I touched it and talked to it all the way home, and I feel a little bit creepy about that. Like, I picked up a hitchhiker and, like, touched it a lot. But it's a plant.
We don't really take care of that one very well.
Well, I try to, but I keep knocking it into the sink.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of problems for that plant that it's trying to overcome. Maybe we put the little one next to it as encouragement. Like, see, this plant's had troubles too, and look what it's done. You can do it. So,
like, you can inspire the little one, right? I'd give it a pork chop right now.
And they treat burns.
Right. So I felt like this would be like a symbiotic relationship. You heal me of my stupidity, and I'll give you plant food. Full thickness.
Of the skin.
That sounds like a badass bitch. Clearly I can feel the nerves because it sucks.
Yeah, I didn't know you burned yourself with the fireworks, though.
I don't just tell you every little thing. Well, this is me being forecastive. That's not a word.
You had some brats there?
I was sitting there minding my own business, and then John brought me this beautiful wiener. He showed me his beautiful wiener, and he had it on a plate, and he put it in front of me, and I was like, what is this serendipitous occasion that you've presented me with your beautiful white wiener? And they messed up a wiener. It's thin and white and slightly charred. Well, this is taking a left turn. Why are you still chatting to me? Just started getting a little misty-eyed. Or you can see why it makes me manic.
Get a lot of really nerdy puns and a lot of alliteration.
Get your head around it. It's like you're a burnout official in charge of interdimensional fire code violations.
We're talking about exploding pants.
The whole pants, or just something in the pocket?
No, the whole pants.
I was just thinking of what it would take to get all my pants to explode. A lot of people don't go to singular pant.
No, they don't.
Man, we need a shirt that just says, incapable. I'm Father Ember, High Priest of the Eternal Backdraft. Blessed be the blaze and the charred remains it leaves behind. Let us pray for proper ventilation. That has nothing to do with jizz. We don't run into burning buildings. We invite them to a dance-off and then critique their form. I have the scrolls, the matches, and a questionable amount of enthusiasm. I got a gut full of regret and a Zippo full of justice. Now that's the good stuff. Existential fire that disrespects chronology. It's a bit dramatic. Greetings, carbon-based commuters of the temporal flame.
Maybe more lounge singer, less cult leader.
Let's slide into smoky velvet with time-warped cool. Lounge lizard of the chrono smolder.
What?
Voice like a cigarette soaked in bourbon. The kind of guy who croons through a burning piano bar. Backwards. I'm Ash Remnant, matchstick coroner of the fourth dimension. Nope, not coroner, crooner. Just maybe a duet with Rate. Rate? No, that's F. And maybe, just maybe. Quit laughing over my a duet with Fate. And you promised this one wouldn't hurt me.
It wouldn't.
It wouldn't?
It won't.
Except except you're going to take it the wrong way. I feel like I nailed that. You got the pun look on your face. This has been a long hangover.
Okay.
You should read the fine print. Can everyone hear my thoughts? Or...
I would like to be able to do this without breathing at all, actually.
You want to do it underwater?
So I don't have to edit all the breath sounds out. But
let's do it underwater.
It's not physiologically possible. It's definitely going to affect our audio quality if we try to do this.
No, these are good
underwater.
mics. We can do this underwater. Just because the bean burritos are 99 cents doesn't mean you got to have 4.
Last week, we wrapped up our 3-part series, The Girls Are Gone. Oh, no. The beer is on the floor.
Damn.
But it didn't spill.
This is how you know you're faced with incredible talent, even when I drop a beer.
It refuses to spill. It knows better. It's got respect.
The entire country, like, spontaneous. You're welcome. Do your balls hang low? You are definitely doing some rituals.
Trousers were turning traitorous. Dungarees were detonating. Okay, wait a minute, I can do this.
The alliteration is strong with you.
You have no idea, we're just getting started.
Oh my god.
Hang on, I got it.
What the f***?
I was trying to relax.
Did you just say something in reverse? And in demon languages?
I can hear it when I'm still smiling after we lose it, when I start again, and it breaks up the flow, and so I have to make myself relax my cheek muscles.
Well, at least you got a process that you're working with. That's good. That was the chair again, right?
Yeah. I think I'm touching the chair behind me.
Oh, boy.
I can't.
Boy, you're really struggling. I would offer to help, but this is so much fun to watch.
This is going to be the longest recording session ever.
Everybody gets along until you light your neighbor's laundry line. It's starting to look like a fuse. Man, you've gone too far.
When his drawers detonated mid-horseback ride.
What the fuck is wrong with you?
What in the scorching stitchery was going on?
At some point, people are going to expect you to talk like a person. No, that's a lot of people in one pair of pants.
A time when pants weren't thirded.
Weren't thirded? What is thirded?
An even more powerful trouser.
Dude, the most powerful trouser.
Gotta go full unhinged. Impregnate your underoos with the stuff, and they become thunderoos.
You just impregnate your underoos. Sometimes you will feel a sensation in your pants. It's raining pickles.
Not the lollipop guild.
Yeah. No, you gotta wash it or it'll get funky. There's no preservatives.
This episode of Crime to Burn is brought to you by 1 full year of questionable decisions, sleep deprivation, and the overwhelming support of strangers on the internet, which, statistically, is the most suspicious kind of support. As a reminder, podcasting is not covered by your health insurance. Side effects may include caffeine dependency, an inflated sense of justice, and yelling, "This is not how fire science works," at your phone. Please consult your therapist before starting a true crime podcast, or at least someone who loves you enough to hide your phone when you're spiraling about accelerant-sniffing dogs at 3 a.m. This has been your friendly, mildly sarcastic PSA. Happy 1-year podiversary to us. And remember, if you've learned anything from this show, it's that nothing says justice like a fire that definitely wasn't an accident, but was probably investigated by someone who failed chemistry.
And that's a wrap on year 1.
And somehow we're still married and the mic still works.
We'll keep burning backwards. You just try to keep up. And this episode was brought to you by Saddle Lube. Get you some. Put it on your butt. And I will have continued my legacy of discovering and exploiting talent.
Am I being exploited?
Yeah. This episode is brought to you by poor impulse control and a deeply suspicious love of fire.
Deeply. Signing off.
Do you love true crime and travel? Having traveled the world solo the last couple of years and being obsessed with true crime, I found myself researching others who took the same vacations but never made it home. The Last Trip is a true crime podcast covering missing and murdered people that were living their best lives on vacation. I'm your host, Jamie Beebe, and each week I'll bring you on The Last Trip, taking a deep dive into vacation culture and travel spots, tips on staying alive while traveling, and ultimately recreating someone's last days in paradise. What led to their last trip? What are the hard facts? What is the final outcome? And could you be next? David Snedden was a 24-year-old college student from Utah attending Mandarin classes in Beijing when he mysteriously disappeared while hiking Tiger Leaping Gorge. Chinese authorities said he drowned in the gorge, and U.S. authorities agreed, although his body was never found and his parents didn't believe that. 7 years later, out of the blue, they got a phone call from a former U.S. official who had evidence David is still alive. This case sounds like a Hollywood movie, but evidence doesn't lie. So where is David Snedden? Famous rugby player and Celebrity X Factor contestant Levi Davis went missing in Barcelona last year while on a backpacking trip through Europe. Just days before he vanished, he posted a 15-minute video to his Instagram account saying his life was in danger and people were after him. After he disappeared, several theories emerged. But what really happened to Levi Davis? Join me, Jamie Beebe, co-host of the popular true crime series Strictly Stalking, as I embark on a brand new adventure combining true crime and travel. Listen to The Last Trip wherever you get your podcasts.